Hi everyone, this is our Ecology video project done by Sav and Lettie. Okay, so one of the organisms that we recorded in our observational video is the Steller jay. This species is typically found in North America. They are actually considered to be one of the most annoying birds found in nature, and they're not afraid to beg for food. So they can be commonly seen landing near or on picnic tables and even next to humans whenever food is present. These jays are easily recognized by their loud screeches, but they can also produce a soft warble, which is considered to be beautiful. And because of their loud screeches, it is often said that they can be heard before they are even seen. However, they are one of the most commonly sighted birds at the Yosemite National Park, and that's due to their prominent features, which include their blue feathers along their bodies and tails, and then their black heads with their tall black crests. As for their diet, the Steller jay typically eat seeds, nuts, berries, and other fruit.
California ground squirrels are one of the most common squirrels that you would find when you go to Yosemite National Park. But in comparison to the squirrels that are found here on Fresno State's campus, these squirrels are not as domesticated. A little fun fact about these squirrels is that the male ground squirrels are more territorial. And typically, just like the Steller jays, these squirrels eat insects, roots, seeds, grains, nuts, and fruits.
Next, we are going to show you our observational video, which was recorded up in Yosemite National Park on one of the trails they have there. And in the video, you're going to see the Steller jay and the ground squirrels, and then the interaction between the two.
Peggy, can you check if I got any ants on me, please?
Okay, so after watching that video, we can clearly see the Steller jays and the squirrels both searching for food. Initially, the squirrels were surrounding the fallen tree trunk trying to look for food. Shortly after, the Steller jays also came down from the tree trying to search for food near the tree trunk as well. They were probably looking for seeds, nuts, and fruits because that is food that they both eat. The squirrels were then seen chasing the Steller jays away from the branch. And as that is happening, we can hear the Steller jay screeching and flying away from the squirrels.
Okay, so based on our observations that were made in the video, we hypothesized that there is interspecific competition between the Steller jays and the California ground squirrels. This would be considered our alternative hypothesis. So our null hypothesis would be then that there is no interspecific competition between the Steller jays and the California ground squirrels. And then just on a side note, for the rest of our video, when we say our hypothesis, we are actually referring to our alternative hypothesis and not the null hypothesis.
Okay, so stated in the slide previously, we're going to be testing to see if interspecific competition is occurring. So what is interspecific competition? This is basically when two different species are competing for the exact same resource, but this is not to be confused with intra-specific competition, which is when organisms of the same exact species compete for the same resource. And there are two types of competition, direct and indirect. Direct competition is when two different species are physically competing for a resource, versus indirect competition is when two species are not interacting with each other, but are still competing for the exact same resource. And in the experiment that we're going to be conducting and talking about, we are looking to see if there's direct interspecific competition taking place.
Moving on to our experimental design, to actually conduct an experiment to test our alternative hypothesis, we would need 3 large enclosed areas, as shown in the pictures on this slide. These areas would be located in the temperate forest biome of Yosemite National Park, since that is where we observe the organisms and where we know they can be successful. 2 of the areas would be our control groups, since one of them would include just 50 Stellar jays, and then the second would have just 50 California ground squirrels. The third enclosed area would be our experimental group, since it's going to include both 50 Stellar jays and 50 California ground squirrels, both living together in the same area. All 3 areas would be enclosed so as to prevent the jays and squirrels from either entering or leaving the area, and to also prevent any other organisms from doing the same so that they don't affect our data collection. Other controlled variables that we would have would be having the same amount of seeds, nuts, and fruits. And this is so that each area has the same amount of food and then the same type of food, so that there isn't variation in their food resources. As far as our actual data collection for our experiment to test the hypothesis, we would be measuring the growth rate, reproduction rate, and death rate of all the groups in our experimental design. These measurements would be done every 6 months for about 15 to 20 years to ensure that we have enough data to see any possible trends that may occur. To measure the growth rate, we would be actually weighing each individual, and then to measure the reproductive rate, we would be counting the number of new offspring for each individual. To be able to differentiate between the offspring from the parents and between the different generations, all the organisms would be tagged with different colors and numbers. And then to measure the death rate, we would simply be counting the number of dead individuals for each group. Our independent variable for our experiment would be the 4 groups, which are the 50 Stellar jays just living together in their enclosed area, and then the 50 California ground squirrels living in their area, and then the 2 groups of the 2 organisms living together in the experimental group area. And then our dependent variables would be the growth, reproduction, and death rates of the Stellar jays and the California ground squirrels in all 4 of the groups.
Okay, so now that we've seen the setup of the experimental design, there are 2 possible predictions that can be made about the experiment itself. First of all, if there is interspecific competition taking place and our hypothesis was proven to be true, we would be able to see that in our control groups, the growth rate and the reproduction rate of both the Stellar jays and the California ground squirrels would have a much higher number than the experimental group that contained both organisms. The death rate would also be lower in the control groups, but the experimental group would have a much higher death rate of either organism or maybe even possibly both. The second prediction that can be made is that if there is no interspecific competition taking place and our hypothesis is proven to be inaccurate, we would be able to see that all of our data would be relatively the same across the board. Our control groups and our experimental groups would all have a similar growth rate, a similar reproduction rate, and a similar death rate. Does anyone have any questions?